Hi, you. Welcome back to Uncensored. I'm Marianne, your host from Yachts Mermaids, and today I have Craig from. Actually, he's a former lead hand from a 72 meter who's now helping crew transition from yachts to land. And welcome, Craig. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Marion. Thanks for having me.
So I was talking to Craig, and one of the things that catch my attention was the fact that he was telling me how, because he comes from a background of having sisters and really understanding or having a more understanding vision or experience, I guess, on being with women and how they're cyclical and emotional and all this, how when he joined yachting he actually struggled with the opposite, which is what we believe to be the norm, right? With men not really understanding and men not being open and vulnerable and talking like women usually do, right? So, when I say this, what comes up for you, Craig?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of masculinity and ego involved especially in the male side of the yachting industry. And I mean, with all um, with the hierarchy, especially in the deck department, it's a continual pissing contest. Excuse my language for who has the most knowledge and the skills. And there's a huge expectation that needs to be managed. And I think captains need to put more focus into the crew management and improving crew lifestyle so that politics don't evolve unnecessarily.
Mm. And I actually showed you this before, and I don't know if you guys can see it, but basically what it says is when someone asks me how I'm able to work 80 hours a week yet still have the energy to go out on weekends, it says normal person 72% water, and then me caffeine, nicotine, hate, alcohol, ibuprofen. And I mean, we were laughing when I show him this, because obviously we can relate, because at one point we were probably that. But it's really interesting to me that the normal person is 72% water, which is like emotions flowing, and then the us, like in yachting, caffeine, nicotine, hate, alcohol, ibuprofen, which is like suppressants basically, which is like not actually sharing, but just containing everything in. And then obviously you need all this stuff to make it manageable. So when you see this image, what comes up for you? Like, do you remember yourself being there, or were you never really in that position where you were constantly suppressing in order to keep up with the mentality that we have been interacting with inside a boat?
No, definitely. I mean, like I said before, being out at sea for so long, you miss that grounding effect that you have just, being on land. And a lot of craziness happens out there because we sedating ourselves with caffeine and, so many stimulants that we actually struggle to just come down to earth sometimes. And there's a lot of anxiety and tension that builds up. And, it's quite often crew members, when they eventually do get ashore, they race to the closest bars and sedate themselves from all the politics and stress. And yeah, we really need to open up our communication on board, and I don't think it's healthy for like that for crew dynamics if the only time they're communicating is after like a drinking frenzy. So there definitely needs to be like a better health routine on board.
So, as a crew member, when you were on board, what was your experience around communication between men, like mental health, like knowing if they're okay? Like, was there any sort of implementation system created among you guys to promote that it's okay to talk, to promote almost like a safety environment where it's okay to come forward and maybe tell your head of department, like, hey, I'm not feeling good, blah blah blah? Was that even a thing, or how was that scenario in reality for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general we were quite lucky. We did have a lot of like males on board that were quite open to communicating and listening, which was nice. But in general, I think the yachting community, it does suppress that a lot. And it's always, like I said before, there's a huge hierarchy, and I think everybody's fighting for these ranks, especially in the deck department. And with that comes, this a lot of like emotionless and suppressing those emotions and not being allowed to really express your feelings. So I'm very lucky in the sense that on my last boat, especially, I had my partner on board, so I spent a lot of time communicating with her, and that was a nice way to just release some of that anxiety and tension. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people out there that don't have that, and those are the guys that I think, when they do get the chance to get ashore, they go to the nearest bar to sedate themselves. So, like I was telling you before, when I was living in Indonesia, I joined a men's circle, and at first I thought it was going to be like really lame. I've just never been brought up with men communicating like that and like so open. So I didn't have high expectations going in, but I was overwhelmed when I actually got in there and realized, there were these huge, like a Kiwi rugby player that came in there. Somebody who, if I saw him at a bar, I'd probably be quite intimidated and not really open up to him. But he really just showed his vulnerability and opened up about his insecurities. And it was so beautiful to see. And I suppose I'm quite lucky. A lot of my friends back home, we the kind of guys, we'll give each other lots of like hugs, and we're open to, we'll tell each other that we love each other without it being weird. But I think there needs to be that kind of safe space on board as well. And I've tried to implement men's circles online, but I think there's still a hesitancy for guys to communicate on that emotional level.
So how, when you were on board, were you able to implement any of this, like communication wise with your team members, or how was your head of department like handling this? Like what's your experience with creating a safe container for people to say, I feel this way, whether it's positive or not so good.
Yeah, I suppose with the chain of command on a boat, especially on the deck side, like I was lead hand at the time. I had like 4 guys under me that I would speak to, but then I had, the second officer, the captain above me. So it all trickles down, and we did have some good leaders on the boat, but stuff does get lost in, throughout the chain of command. And I suppose it depends on the boats. Some boats I was on, there's especially the smaller boats, there's a nice open element for people to sit down and have meals together and speak openly. But when you've got these big boats where everybody's separated to their different jobs, and there's very few times where they all come together. I think it's important to create specific times for that to be implemented, where we had a deck meeting every morning, which I think was massively important. But I think that should be a non-negotiable, and not just for the sake of discussing what's going on the boat, but to actually check in with everybody and see how they're doing emotionally, just physically. A lot of us, especially during charters, and when you've got boss trip after boss trip, you're exhausted, you just don't want to go anymore, and you need to check in on each other, just like a tap on the shoulder, give each other some love, just show each other support. You're all in that together, so you need to feel like it's individualized and left out, and it's important to show each other that love.
So if you were to go back to a vessel, and what would you do differently to make sure that there's that container? Like, how would you create that container?
I think towards the end of my career, I was definitely guilty of, getting lost in the whole work specifics, and I lost sight of, gelling with the crew outside of the whole workplace. Especially, I think, as you go up in the ranks, your job becomes so important. You've got a lot of things to manage, and especially on the bigger boats, there's so many things to consider that you lose sight of that personal connection. People just become a number, and you're telling people what to do, but you're not actually seeing how they're doing it or how they feel about doing it. And it's important when you, especially like I said, when you're doing that day in, day out for weeks on end without a break, you need to keep up that crew morale.
So how would you keep that crew morale, or how would you have liked for your heads of departments, captains, to bring that to you guys? Because
Yeah,
like
I think
what I'm basically trying to get to is like everybody talks about, oh yeah, crew morale, this, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk about how to actually do that, you know? Because a lot of people are sitting here thinking, oh, that would be cool, but I don't even know where to start. How do I even like, do I just say, hey, how you doing? You know, like let's give real examples of how you would have liked to be treated, and maybe how you would actually, what you would actually implement if you were to go back to a vessel, you know, as a head of department.
yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think obviously music is a big one. I know some boats have frowned upon it, which just bewilds me. You know, like when crew, especially when there's no guests on board, like, you know, like turn up those tunes, you know, like have fun, like, you know, dance, sing on the deck. That's time where you really feel free. But I think one of the best things that we had on the boat was also like it was a fun style of finding people, you know, just for little things on the boat. And we collected a kitty of, you know, $5 at a time for people that did silly mistakes. And once we collected enough money and we actually were in a port for long enough, we'd go and use that for a deck fines meeting. And I mean, we went for like a golf day in West Palm Beach, you know, and that was amazing. You know, we would go-karting and sometimes, and just those kind of events where you're really doing those bonding sessions. I think that's entirely like extremely important.
Okay, so definitely allowing people to have music so they can have fun while they're doing the daily duties when there's no guests on board. And you think that bonding with the crew outside of the vessel also is a good idea because it gives you more of a trusting, you know, like it brings more trust among crew members. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think another thing as well was, you know, especially when the guests were off, we had a lot of toys on our boats, you know, jet skis, stand-up paddle boards, surfboards. We had a ski boat, and all of those things need to be maintained, but they also need to be used, you know.
Right.
And some days we'd have a day where we'd actually go test all that equipment, but we'd turn it into like a fun crew day out, and we'd go and we'd take guys wakeboarding and skiing and stand-up paddling down the ravines, and that's just beautiful, especially to be like for the interdepartments bonding, you know,
Exactly.
because especially the chefs and people like that don't actually get to go out. I mean, on our boat we got to explore a lot with the guests, but I mean, I know the chefs, they sit in the galley for days on end without going outside, and I know it can be pretty depressing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's detrimental to their mental health and physical health as well. And what about the days where we are with guests forever, or what it seems to be forever? How can we actually, what can we implement as the head of departments, you yourself, you know, as a deck department, what would you have liked to have? You know, I know that you said that maybe in those daily meetings, like you said, non-negotiables, you have to meet up just because that shows that you care, but then not just make it about you have to do this, that needs to be done. More of like, okay, yep, now let's talk about us. How are you? How are you feeling? You know, like, do you have a cramp in your leg? Because I know you were working really hard, waxing on, waxing off, or whatever, you know, like, so what are those little things that you, looking back now, would have liked to actually explore? And if you were to go back to a vessel, that you would actually say, like, you know what, I would definitely implement this, you know?